How was everyone today? Isn't this a beautiful day?
Process of elimination.
Dave Hurley from Boston and I have lived through a winter of 0-degree days. So if you don't mind, we're going to move the panel outside. Is that okay with everyone? I wanted to come up with a really good joke, you know, to start the panel, and the only thing I could think of is, since it was the National Geographic, I'm glad everyone's observing the dress code. Doesn't work? Okay. I want to recognize a really close friend of mine, Tom Lee, American Federation of Musicians. I particularly want to acknowledge Tom for two reasons. One is that the AFM has been probably the one institution that's been our biggest supporters, and you know, I guess now that we can come out of the closet after 8 years, you know, we're a democratic organization apparently, and the AFM and the FMC have always been leaned towards Democratic side, although there's been many Republican politicians, particularly Orrin Hatch, who supported us. But as many of you know, I'm an elected member of the Democratic Party in Massachusetts. I wear that proudly, and Tom has just been a mensch for years, working with us on a lot of tough policies. And I think Dave, who's a friend of mine from Boston, can both acknowledge we're big supporters of the AFM chapter in Boston, Massachusetts, who works with our symphony orchestra, et cetera. So when we tried to come up with an idea for this panel, we wanted to do something that would kind of reflect not only where the administration is going over the next few years, but also the Congress. You know, clearly there's much more important issues. When you live in a country where the Secretary of Treasury comes out and gives a speech and the stock market goes down 400 points, I mean, I think there's maybe more important issues than copyright law. But we did put together really an all-star panel of awesome people, people who are very distinguished in what they do. But my observation is that as you read the stimulus bill, if you have free time, there's a lot of things in there that actually affect the music industry. So I think really the way to proceed would be to allow each of our panelists to really talk about what they think the priorities should be. And for folks like Cal and Gigi and Rick, who actually have a lot of knowledge of the inner workings of our government, they can kind of offer some perspective on what they think is actually, oh, Steve as well, what's happening with the legislation, because frankly, there are a lot of things embedded, and of course, well, David obviously too, but I mean, you know, there's clearly stuff embedded. There's clearly stuff embedded in the legislation that, I keep forgetting David.
You're down to two, Walter.
I'm sorry. But there's clearly stuff embedded in the legislation that affects the music industry and issues like net neutrality. So what I like to do is just have each person start off and talk about, you know, what they think should be the priorities of the next few years, and do they believe that, you know, in the stimulus packages, are there any things that really will affect the business in the short term? So I'll start off with my very close personal friend, Gigi Sohn. Gigi, would you like to offer your opinions, please?
Sure. I think it's going to be a very interesting 4 years, I would say particularly around copyright, just because I think there's a battle going on in the Democratic Party. It's not going to shock anybody to know that the Democratic Party, for obvious reasons, has been very close to Hollywood, the recording industry, the content industry generally. And there's been a lot of money passed, you know, from one to the other. That's our democratic process. On the other hand, you know, folks that think that, you know, we have strong enough copyright and it's, you know, time to look at new business models and other things like that are also tend to be majority of Democrats as well. So I think you're going to see a battle going on. I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see who gets appointed to some of the key positions. There's been some hand-wringing over some of the Justice Department appointments. I actually defended at least 2 of those appointments. You can read that on my blog. But we still have the IP coordinator, or IP czar, which is going to be in the White House, and that was pursuant to an act of Congress last year. We've got the head of the PTO, who they had, I understand from the transition people, had hoped to be named on Inauguration Day, but Secretary Richardson, or presumed Secretary Richardson's dropping out. Had a lot to do with delaying that, and there's just a bunch of really, really critical positions, and you know, we've sent names up to the White House. They don't include my name, they don't include Pam Samoson's name, they don't include Larry Lessig's name, of people with more nuanced positions on copyright and patents. You know, we frankly don't think that there should be people filling those sides from any part of the so-called culture wars. It should be people who will have a more balanced position and are more open-minded to both sides. So that's just the overall thing. So what should the priorities be, in my opinion? First and foremost, and this is where the broadband stimulus bill comes in, is net neutrality and other openness provisions that promote competition both among edge technologies, like the Googles and the eBays and the Skypes of the world, but also that promotes competition among internet service providers. The fact of the matter is we have a set of regional duopolies, cable and telco, whereas 10 years ago, my communications director, Art Brodsky, likes to tote around a book of internet service providers in the dial-up world, and there were 5,000 of them, 13 ISPs per person with an internet connection. And I think it's critically important that the government start to look at saying to the dominant carriers like Verizon and AT&T and Comcast, you have to make your networks available for competitors to essentially share your lines and provide competitive internet service. Well, why is that important to musicians? When you got competition, speeds go higher and prices go down. It is not an accident that we are so low on the broadband adoption rankings and the rankings for speed and value in this country. If you look at countries around the world that have the highest speeds and have the lowest prices, for the most part, they will have open access policies.
Yeah, and if I may just intercede for 1 second.
And that was just one thing.
But what shocks me is, and again, I don't want to be partisan, but Corin from Texas, the senator, who I have tremendous respect for, a very well-educated, intelligent guy, big music guy, I might add, but he wants to eliminate the broadband provisions of the stimulus bill. And I just don't understand what the policy point is, because I would think it's something we'd all could agree upon would be a good public policy initiative for the United States.
So this is interesting that you mentioned that, Walter, because I spoke yesterday at the American Enterprise Institute just across the street. If you don't know AEI, it's very conservative and it's mostly economists. So it was me and three, I'd say in their 50s and 60s, white male economists debating. And needless to say, I was the only one who defended broadband in the stimulus bill. Why? Because A, it creates jobs. The more you deploy, the faster speeds you deploy, you're going to create jobs. There's no two ways about that. Number two, this is infrastructure. I asked my three economist colleagues whether any one of them would oppose money for highway building, and none of them did. And to me, it's the exact same thing. So in the 1950s, Eisenhower laid out a lot of money to build the highways so people could go to work, okay? This is building the information highway so people can have access to greater employment opportunities, to better health care, to better education. So to me, it's no different. I think it's unassailable that there be broadband in there. Another economist, this was unbelievable, he said, well, he pulled out the UN rankings for prenatal birth and said, well, shouldn't we be fixing these things first? And I said, you can always find things like cure for cancer and other things that are, more important than broadband deployment, but that's hardly the point. To the extent that this bill is about stimulating the economy and getting people access to jobs, broadband has got to be in there.
And we have to do it for our rural communities too. And speaking of rural communities, Rick, I want you to. I always pick on you because you're from the South. That's my problem. But I just want to get the musician and songwriter's perspective on this, because I know you've been very involved in a lot of the legislation. Frankly, I just want to know from your personal perspective, how do you think this is going to play out for songwriters over the next 4 years?
Well, if we're talking about net neutrality, the Songwriters Guild position is basically we want anti-piracy. Our big concern, what the real problem for us on the internet is that basically it's music has been taken over by an anonymous mob of music looters, essentially. So if we're talking about fixing the internet in some way like the net neutrality bill was trying to do, that's our focus, is anti-piracy.
Do you think there's going to be any initiatives in the next few years that will affect things? For example, the last few years we saw attempts to modify Section 115. We've seen attempts to, accelerate the payment of mechanical royalties. Do you think any of that stuff will come up after the administration, the Congress, has the opportunity to resolve some of our financial issues?
I do think there's going to be another attempt to reform Section 115 because it's just not streamlined enough. The system isn't streamlined enough for the internet.
Right.
If you're going to set up a music service and you need to license 3 million songs. That's a tough thing to do.
So what do you think, David? David, do you see any type of new legislation for copyright law coming down the next few years?
I see some coming down. I don't necessarily see a lot. I just don't think, like it or not, it's going to be a top priority for the administration or necessarily for Congress. It's great to have the committee chair of the full Judiciary Committee in each House of Congress so interested in copyright that they decided to elevate it to the full committee rather than have a subcommittee. The other side of that coin is the full Judiciary Committee in each House has a lot of other business that's a lot more pressing, particularly right now, than dealing with copyright matters. So just getting their attention is going to be very, very difficult.
Well, let me ask you a premise. I mean, you know, we're the cool people because we like music. We know who, like, there's probably like a half dozen people here who know who Para Ubu is and stuff like that. But when, you know, I talk to some of my colleagues in the law, particularly the patent attorneys. I mean, the patent attorneys have had their priorities backed up for like 10 years.
Yep.
And you wonder whether or not, you know, this administration being so focused on business to a certain degree, and patent lawyers, you know, do the copyright issues get put aside so the Judiciary Committee can catch up with patent issues? Is that a reasonable observation?
Well, first of all, when you talk about the administration, I've been in Washington for over a decade, and it's probably fair to say that for most of that time, the administration's role with respect to copyright legislation, whether it was the Clinton administration or the Bush administration, has not been all that visible. Now, you had some stuff with respect to like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Certainly the Clinton administration was involved in that. That's going back a while. So Congress has pretty much been an independent agent with respect to copyright legislation for the most part. So it's hard to say what the administration's copyright policy is going to be. We don't even know who the administration's copyright people are going to be yet. And understandably, that's not the top priority to get those people in place right now. And I think Gigi pointed out that if you look at the base for President Obama's support, it draws people who both are very pro-copyright from some of the copyright industries and people who have their doubts about the current copyright law. So which one of those trends is going to prevail in the administration is hard to tell.
Yeah, to the point where Scott Fairley is actually in a copyright infringement case now, who, of course, is the author of the famous Hope poster.
Shepard Fairey.
Shepard Fairey, I'm sorry. I'm ashamed he was arrested in Boston last weekend, so I guess I'm putting that out. Hal, let me ask you a question. I mean, you know, you have a unique perspective on this, but, you know, we've had the past 8 years, we had a Republican president, we had some Republican Congresses, now we have a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress. Do you think that once we clear the decks, hopefully and beneficially for the economy, that there may be a more activist role for the administration and the Congress in regard to copyright law? Do you think because it's been a political sea change, will that have an effect?
Well, you know, the first thing I thought when Gigi started talking about important policy posts in the administration that will affect all of us in the copyright industry, I thought, wow, I haven't thought about the administration in 8 years because there was nothing we could do with them. You know, the whole focus has been Congress. And I think it's still, as David mentioned, I think Congress will still take the lead on copyright because we have two very activist chairmen who care about copyright, and also because the administration has a lot of other big issues to deal with. So I think the copyright initiatives will probably still come out of the two committees. When you mentioned the stimulus bill, I just wanted to say, in addition to broadband, something else that I think we all care about is there was $50 million in the House bill for arts funding, which Senator Coburn stripped out of the Senate bill. No surprise there. And I hope that that's, you know, in conference that $50 million stays in. It doesn't sound like much money, but for the National Endowment of the Arts, it's a lot of money.
Well, you know, so much for the Symphony Orchestra in Oklahoma City. I mean, I was shocked by that. And, you know, people, I don't know if you've been to Oklahoma, but I mean, this is a place where they have symphony orchestras, chamber quartets, and, you know, and they get it right on the nose because it's not the DCs and the Bostons and the New Yorks and the LAs that suffer, it's the smaller cities that need the NEA funding. And I just, to me that, and I like him, but I just understand the public policy point of stripping $50 million.
I know, yeah.
You know, but, so Steve, what's your observation here?
Well, I agree with a lot of the things that have been said in terms of the priorities. By the way, I just got to note that Geithner spoke today, and he had copyright in the speech, and it went up 400 points. But, you know, there's no question that, you know, the priorities right now are elsewhere, and we really don't know. Even coming into, you know, the last month or two, if you look at you know, the administration's discussions of IP issues, I mean, they're very general. They don't have a lot of specifics around them, and you can compare that to a lot of other areas that are much more specific. So I think Gigi's right. It's really unclear which direction they're going. I don't think they really know. We're still waiting for people to be put in the positions that I think are going to provide some direction on those issues. And you know, until we have some time for that to happen and those people get in those positions and the administration has some time to devote to it, I think it's unclear that a whole lot is
Is it
gonna
true that
happen.
you guys are running the Justice Department?
Just a part of it.
But, no, but again, I mean, what's your, you know a lot about what happens here. And do you think that the political context is changed? And again, notwithstanding the fact that we have to deal with economic issues, but do you think that fundamentally you're dealing with a different political calculus here that may make it easier or harder to have copyright legislation? They may entertain different forms of copyright legislation. Has there been a substantial change?
Well, I think the question is whether once you get past, you know, the issues, the more macro issues, and there is some opportunity to look at issues like copyright. And hopefully it will be something that is important to the administration, but in so doing, I think what you'll be seeing is that it's going to be a more kind of balanced approach. It's trying to find, I think it's what Gigi said, you know, they're going to, you're not going to have the administration coming from one specific angle, and therefore, depending on what the issue is, and you know, there were a number just listed in the brochure for the panel itself. I think that they will be trying to find the right balance in those, and I think that ultimately is a good thing.
That's what I think too.
That's a positive thing.
And he's the RIAA, folks.
Well, we're always balanced.
No, I know, but, you know, but you know, it's funny though. I mean, you know, a lot of us in this room, in one way or another, have struggled with these issues. But if you look at the patent piece, I mean, it's so much worse because, you know, all the proposals we've had for patent law fundamentally affect major companies in the United States for billions of dollars.
Yeah, I think you're going to see patent reform coming out of it. To the extent there's anything involving intellectual property, you're going to see a patent reform bill first. I know that Senator Leahy's office is working on. I mean, the problem, we tried to get involved with patent reform. It's very difficult, particularly if you don't have somebody who really understands this stuff.
Well, you have to have a science degree from college.
Yeah,
you know?
Seriously. But you have such humongous corporate interests on both sides. So on one side, you have almost the entire tech industry. Microsoft, I think actually Hollywood is aligned with, that's the Coalition for Patent Fairness.
Right.
So you've got the tech industry and some of the Hollywood folks, and then on the other side, you have the biotech, the pharmaceutical companies, and companies like Corning. Okay, so there are actually some tech companies. I mean, we're talking about Clash of the Titans.
In hospitals and the medical schools.
Yeah. So you've got, in that Clash of the Titans, you usually either get sausage, which is totally worthless, or like last year, you got nothing.
So now that we,
I mean, the good news is the Supreme Court's taking care of a lot of the problems in the patent area. There's been, the Supreme Court's been obsessed with patent reform, and I don't think anybody argues with what they've been doing.
So now that
either
we've established that copyright law is the easy part compared to everything else, I'd really like to have you know, YouTube's perspective on this, and I really want you to articulate I really want you to articulate what the changes in copyright law you'd like to see, because I know we've had this conversation before, but I find it very edifying when you talk about the challenges that YouTube has and how that interrelates to what we're talking about potential copyright law reform in the future.
Sure. I agree with what everybody else is saying, that it's, in light of all the national priorities, it seems like handling some of the nuanced problems and modernization that we need in copyright law is unlikely. And that's really unfortunate because there's always another national priority. We've been having these same issues for, 10 years now since music and the internet, and we've all known about how they need to be fixed, and we never can seem to get the attention because of the complexity of the situation. So let me explain to you sort of where we're coming from. So at YouTube, obviously a lot of people upload music onto YouTube, and we're eligible for safe harbor under DMCA, so YouTube itself is not liable for that if it's infringing. However, content owners have a takedown right, where they can take their music down off of YouTube if they wish. And we don't want them to take their music down from YouTube because we want users to have access to all the content in the world. So what we've undertaken is a very ambitious music licensing effort where we reach out to record labels and music publishers and try to license the use of all of that music on YouTube. Now, for some, when you're talking about music videos that are produced by record labels, that's not so hard because the record labels give you all the rights that you need for the sound recording, for the visual, and they actually also clear the music publishing. The problem is in some of the more experimental, what we're trying to do for the first time really in history, I think, is get a license on behalf of the users to incorporate commercial music into their original videos. So whether it's a commercial sound recording, or it might just be what we call a cover video, which is themselves singing in the shower or playing the piano. These things, it seems like, should be available. We want to build a business that works for music publishers and for YouTube alike, and this is what it takes to do it, unfortunately. Here's the problem. On the sound, let's take the example of someone who puts a commercial sound recording and it's their kids playing in the backyard and they want a funny tune or something in the background. So they put it in. We can identify what that sound recording is because sometimes if we have a content identification system, which is a whole other topic, filtering, which we should talk about later. But if we have a deal with the record label, we'll take their sound recording, put it into a database, and then every time a user uploads a video to YouTube, we compare that video to our database and we say, oh, there's a match. And maybe the record company, and generally the record companies have said, okay, we want to license that to YouTube. So we get all the rights we need from the record company. Check. Now we need to go to the publishers. How do we get the rights we need from the publishers? And herein lies the enormous problem that needs to be fixed. We can get all the rights we need, there's this big debate in the industry about what rights are implicated in internet stream. Is it a performance, is it a public performance, or is it a reproduction? The publishers have taken the position that it's both. So on the record label side, it doesn't really matter because you get all the rights you need from the same place. So it's just, you get all the rights you need to stream. But in the world of music publishing, the publishers have delegated different entities to collect, depending on whether you're performing the work or whether you're reproducing the work. So we need to answer that question. Now, we think that, so the publisher's approach is it's both. Now, historically, you never had to go to both. You either were a music venue or a restaurant and you perform music, or you were selling music and you got the mechanical, or maybe you were a movie and you went and got the sync. You went to one of those places. You never had to go to multiple places to get the publishing rights that you need. Enter internet, because of the unique infrastructure of the internet where there's a server copy and then a stream, which is a transmission, which is sort of like a radio-like performance. The publishers have taken the position that you need both rights. So we have to go to ASCAP, BMI, CSAC. That's fine, we can do that. But on the reproduction side, we're talking about millions of songs that we need to license. And so, first of all, we have no way of knowing who owns any of these songs, where to find these publishers. And often, as you guys know, there's often 2 or 3 or 4 music publishers in one song. And this is all just for the US, and of course we're trying to do this on a global scale.
I would disagree with you on one point, which is, I cut my teeth in hip-hop working for Jay-Z, and frankly, everything you're doing now are the same problems that hip-hop artists have had for 15 years. I mean, it's the same exact issue.
Except what's different is the scale. So if you make one...
No, the difference is you have more money.
No, the
the
difference is if you produce a record that has, 20 samples,
right,
you can hire someone to go...
Not if you're broke.
No, but 20 songs, but we're talking about 10 million songs.
But it's basically the same issue, though. I mean, it's the same old issue of trying to find publishers who'll give you clearances.
I would be, what I think is the solution, that's not scale. So that's what we've been trying to do. We've been out there trying to do deals with publishers and trying to get the data, and there's no database in the world that exists of who owns every song. It just doesn't exist.
Right.
So, and we could spend 10,000 transactions or more, 10 million transactions, I should say, to try to do this, and that's not in anyone's interest, not in the publisher's interest, it's not in our, the business doesn't support that. So what we need to fix this problem, there's a couple of ways to fix it. First of all, I think we should finally make it clear that a server copy that is used to facilitate an otherwise licensed performance, a stream, is a performance. It doesn't, the server copy is a fair use.
And you want to do this legislatively?
I think to establish that it's a fair use, we would need legislation to do that.
Okay, no, I
Okay?
think that's very valid.
Okay, the other thing that we should do, I think, is create a either a blanket or a compulsory license, either ideally, this could be fair use, but if not, I actually think a blanket or compulsory license is also fine for use of music publishing in UGC video of the kind, at least of the kind of someone playing somebody else's song. So right now, today, we have a compulsory license. If you were to record an audio version of someone else's song, you don't have to ask permission. There's a rate set in law. You can do that. You can distribute that. That's great. We build on each other's culture. It's wonderful for music, and everybody's happy.
And the process is so simple.
That's true. The process needs to be better, but at least you don't have to, right? At least you don't have to ask permission.
I want to hear.
The second I want to sing somebody's song, I have to go ask 3 different people's permission if I want to record myself singing a song on the internet.
Maybe you don't have the right lawyers, but that's a different question.
No.
But well,
we have the music publishers issuing takedowns saying that they have the rights to do that in their view is for a synchronization, right? No, the one you could take the position it's a fair use.
Right.
So that would be one position, but a synchronization isn't eligible for a mechanical license.
Right, but my point is that this is not an issue that showed up last week. This is an issue that the music industry has dealt with for 40 years. It's just that the intellect came on. But
it's the scale. It's the scale, and it's the consumer demand. That now you have millions of people around the world that want to participate, and we should be enabling them to participate and pay songwriters. The problem now is money's left on the table because we only monetize. We only sell advertising when it's fully licensed.
Rick, what is your response?
we want to pay.
I want to hear what Rick has to say.
Okay, but just one more thing, Rick. Before Rick talks, I just want to say that this is not a matter of economic value because we'll pay ASCAP or BMI or whatever the blanket license is, the fair value. The value is what the value is. This is about finding a way to administer this so people can engage in this incredibly socially useful and artistic behavior. It's an administrative issue. It's not an economic issue. We want to pay. This will enable us to pay. It will enable us to pay more to everyone.
Oh, okay.
The floor is yours, sir.
I was waiting. Now, what she's saying is right. Licensing is very difficult. It's a mess. Obviously, a hodgepodge put together over 100 years of different technologies. Every time a technology comes around, we try to deal with it the best way we can to monetize the activity. Obviously, we're having problems monetizing the activity, and this will work out over the years, I'm certain. What I'm more concerned about is the idea that you should never have to ask permission to use somebody's song, and the idea that anybody should be able to use my song in a home video of somebody being hit in the crotch with a baseball. Obviously we don't have moral rights here in the United States, which is another whole issue, so we can't actually stop them. They can take a compulsory license, use it any way they want. But at the end of all these solutions, it always comes down to, we want to pay you, but we only want to pay you like, microscopic payments, and we want everything, and we want it now. My theory is you can have good, fast, or cheap. Good, fast, and cheap, pick any two. That's it, If you want really good quality and you want it cheap, it's going to take a long time to license, But in order to get good, fast, and cheap, somebody's going to get screwed in that process. And it's always the songwriters because we don't have the money to basically go up against big corporations like YouTube.
Can you get screwed more than you're getting screwed now, which is no money, because we don't know how to find anyone?
Okay, so in other words, the excuse is, we've got a gun to your head, we're going to steal your stuff, or you take this money here. That's not a good excuse.
No, you know what, I'm
sorry.
going to intervene here. Rick, what it sounds like to me is Zahavah saying, I have a huge, big, fat wallet, I want to pay you, but I can't find you. That's exactly what she's saying, and you're turning it into she's
No, actually, Gigi,
like
what she's saying, let's take. I want to get completely granular and go into really microscopic issues on this because this will take all day. But actually, if you talk about the performance and the mechanical, which is what you're saying, you just want to pay a performance, you don't want to pay a mechanical. Well, do you know that my publisher only recoups on mechanicals? So if you do that and my publisher doesn't make any money, every professional songwriter in America their contracts, they'll lose their jobs because the publishers can't recoup on the performance.
So you're worried
So-
that too much of the money is going to go to the publisher? And
You know what, frankly, from a professional songwriter standpoint, I don't want to be put out of business by you guys because of that. I mean, that's not your intention, but that will
But
be
are
what
you-
happens.
But the money goes to, we can structure where the money goes, and we can, those are easier things to change, right? How is it recouped? How's
But you
it-
can't structure where the money goes, because the money goes according to what the contracts are.
Yeah, and my
That's the-
contract
That's a
says you recoup
contract
on mechanical.
problem, that's not a
I
copyright
agree,
problem.
but every
That's not a Zahavah
contract,
trying to
every
screw 'em
contract
problem.
up till now it's a problem.
No,
So
but see,
this is
that's-
not something you're just
but
going
see,
to gloss over.
This is the fundamental disconnect,
Yeah.
which is the fundamental disconnect is that people like you want to pay people. The people in the music industry have contracts. And, you know, trying to figure out how the money flows through a contract is the issue that never gets dealt with. But I think Cal wanted
Why
something.
why
Yeah,
can't
I-
the money, why can't, I mean, why can't we just set it up so this money goes through the publishers? I mean,
Because you
what-
have to pay whoever if you have a co-publishing agreement, it has to go through the co-publishing agreements. So, I mean, the songwriter may have signed a bad deal and he or she doesn't get the money you think that they're paying them. So you may think you're paying the songwriter, but the songwriter may be recouping a $500,000 advance that they're never gonna see any money until 2025.
And I just think I think what I understand you saying, Rick, is that you would rather the money go to the music publisher so you can recoup your advance than it go directly to the
No,
songwriters?
what
through
I'm
escrow?
saying, no, that's a great paraphrasing of what I've said while leaving out the real content. What
Okay,
I was
I'm-
actually
that's
saying
an honest-
was that there are two things. We've got the mechanical and we have the performance, okay?
Uh-huh.
Then we have sync rights, which is we're also talking about. There's 7 rights, there's 8 rights, there's 9 rights. Every time you turn around,
This is
there's
the
another.
problem, and this
I
is
agree
why
it's a problem.
Congress will never fix it,
Yeah.
because it's too
I
complicated.
think Cal
Well,
wants to
yeah,
jump in.
as long as we're talking about paying for performance, I want to talk about, I want to talk
Great
about,
segue, huh?
One note, John.
I want to talk about performance rights legislation, which, as many of you know, was introduced last year and has just been reintroduced last week by the chairman of the House and Senate Judiciary Committees, Senator Leahy and Congressman Conyers. The new numbers are H.R. 848 and S. 379. There was some discussion in the first panel this morning, and a broadcaster was talking about how the small broadcaster accommodation in the bill wouldn't help him. And I just think it's important to point out that accommodation affects over 75% of AM, FM radios across the country. If they make less than $1.25 million, if they're commercial, they'll only pay a flat $5,000 a year, no royalties at all. And if they're non-commercial, like NPR or a college radio station, they'll only pay a flat $1,000. And you know, for our musicians, it's important that small radios stay alive. It's vital to us. AFM has been part of the media consolidation and localism fight for many years because it's the small radio stations that play the niche music like classical, country, and jazz that's so important to us. So we think this is our year to pass this legislation, and although we often are at loggerheads with our friends in the labels, we're working together on this because it's high time that artists and copyright holders be paid when our music is played on the air, just the way the songwriters are paid. And I also just mentioned that there's a songwriter accommodation in the bill so that the royalties that would go to performers will not impact on royalties that go to songwriters. And before I lose this segue, one other thing that's been mentioned is net neutrality. I think the problem has been that there's been 2 camps up till now. There's, you know, those that want to keep the internet free and unfettered, and the other camp that wants to protect copyrighted product. Well, both of those are very important to AFM because for young artists, it's so important to have the internet open and accessible to them. That's the way they're going to get their music across to the public a lot of times. On the other hand, if you're an established artist, you want to make sure that your work is protected. We think there is a win-win solution, and you could have legislation or administration policy that deals with both of these principles. And as a result of that, I want to announce that today AFM is joining both FMC's Rock the Net campaign and Free Press's Internet for Everyone
Awesome.
All
campaign.
right, excellent.
But let me ask everyone on the panel this question because, you know, there's provisions in the stimulus package that actually attempt to circumvent net neutrality? Am I mistaken here, or does anybody on the panel know? I'll let Rick and Gigi talk about this, but I mean, there's provisions in the stimulus package that have to do with net neutrality. Okay, edify us.
No, Dianne Feinstein, at the behest of Hollywood, tried to put in a provision that would have modified the net neutrality provisions of the stimulus bill that I talked about before. Okay, without going into a whole big legal history lesson on net neutrality, basically, the exception to the requirement that internet service providers not pick winners and losers over the internet, you know, give Google a faster speed, but give Yahoo a slower speed, you know, charge somebody one thing and somebody another thing. The exception is something called reasonable network management, all right? And the idea there is that if there are, you know, reasonable reasons for why, for managing one's traffic, you know, congestion or something like that, that's sort of like the exception to net neutrality. So this language set would have said, equated reasonable network management with copyright filtering.
Right.
Okay, automatic network level copyright filtering.
It did nothing of the sort.
No.
Okay,
Okay,
Steve,
It
what
did nothing of the
okay,
sort.
well,
Do you have the language?
I
Did it
have
say
the-
filtering?
no, it didn't say that. Okay,
Yeah.
what the language
Maybe we
said, I
should
don't
read
have.
the- Let's read the language.
I read the
to what it
language,
says.
Steve, over and over and over again, more than I would have liked
It
to.
doesn't preclude filtering, it says
It doesn't
allows
preclude, it
It just-
allows,
It makes a distinction between lawful and unlawful usage.
no,
Right.
it allows ISPs to do network level copyright filtering, okay? Why am I opposed to that? For several reasons. Number one, it allows an ISP to look at every single transmission that you send over the internet to determine whether there's copyrighted material. Okay, that's number one. Number two, there is no filter, and I know I'm going to hear from Steve. They're 98% accurate. But in this country, we protect the 2% that's lawful speech. I have no problem with the DMCA. I have no problem with copyright holders forwarding notices to people they believe to be violating copyright. I have no problem with otherwise enforcing the copyright law on people that you know, use the internet illegally to infringe on copyright. But network level automatic copyright filtering is a violation of net neutrality. So
Well-
I agree with Hal. You can.
I want to hear what Steve has
Go
to
ahead.
say here.
Hear what Steve has to say.
First of all, I find it interesting that you think there's some consensus about what the definition of net neutrality actually is. Because if you talk to 10 different people or 100 different people or 1,000 different people in Washington, you're going to get 10 or 100 or 1,000 different answers about what that is. So it's not nonsense. I mean, you know, does it include, for example, the fact that an ISP, in order to get a VoIP transmission, can't accelerate that transmission ahead of an email transmission?
Yes.
That's exactly what net neutrality is.
Right.
There is no
So-
technological reason
Well, some
for
people
why
would
someone
agree
had to
with
do
that, and some people would say, no, that's
Well,
not
why don't we
net
get- why don't we get to-
neutrality.
let's
But
get
the point is
Let's
that
get to the
G-
substance of legislation, though. I mean, I don't want to I wanted to hear what
Right.
you think of the legislation.
Well, the legislation does not talk about copyright filtering at all. I mean, this is a bit of a paranoia here. All it says, or the proposed language, and this was some of the language that I believe is exactly what Feinstein was offering, said that nothing would prevent somebody from engaging in reasonable network management practices to specifically aimed at deterring unlawful practices, such as child pornography, copyright infringement, et cetera. Whatever, in our view, whatever net neutrality is, it's about allowing things on the lawful side, not the unlawful side of things. That's what the FCC says. That's what Chairman Markey has said over and over. And so that is an important distinction that I think you know, should be made. There's nothing specific in there about filtering or not filtering.
To deter copyright infringement,
and
you
there are-
may deter, and if you try to deter, which is okay,
But
okay,
you're jumping ahead. You're
no.
jumping ahead to the implementation details of things. You're not talking about what the language actually says.
Well,
You know,
I-
you're
let me-
basically
let me-
saying there
Right,
could
so
be
you're
this
leaving it up,
one way.
you're leaving it up to an ISP to decide what it says.
Well, let me do
okay?
two things.
It says, it doesn't say.
in a second.
And
Except-
what we
okay,
should, and what.
time out.
And so on the
Penalty box.
98.2%.
We'll go to the penalty box. The only thing I would say here, Steve, is I disagree with you on the Markey thing, because I don't think that's what Markey's position is.
Absolutely not Marky's.
Okay, but I respectfully disagree. I just, you know, it's a Massachusetts thing. But I just want to, but I just want to.
I'll give you that point of privilege.
But I just want to have
disagree.
Rick and have you, but I know Rick wants to, Rick is obsessed by this. He's
Well,
obsessed, he's
you know-
obsessed by this and the Tennessee Titans, but that's a whole different
Well,
story.
don't start me with that, because actually, you know, Gigi, the first, I got to tell you, you use the word Hollywood like Rush Limbaugh uses the word liberal. I mean, it basically.
Works for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now we're finally at a point where the ISPs are looking at their networks and going, you know, our networks are just awash with net pollution. And we got scammers, we got phishers, we got viruses, we got, you know, mostly they've got pirated movies and music clogging up the network. And they go, well, this is not fair to our other subscribers, so we're going to bandwidth shape the illegal stuff over here and slow it down a little bit so people doing legitimate stuff can get faster service. Okay, well, that created a firestorm. We ended up at the FCC, and they issued some very reasonable, you know, principles. And those were the principles, I believe, that were in the House side. And then on Feinstein's side, they tried to put something else in. It didn't get in, so it's a moot point. All we're talking about, I believe, is the FCC reasonable management provisions. And that's what we're talking. I mean, we're not talking about deep packet inspection or any of that stuff. You're just, once again.
That always sounds like obscene to me, deep packet inspection.
Yeah, no question.
Can I tell a dirty little secret, Walter? The dirty little secret.
A-Rod's on steroids.
The dirty little secret that needs to be revealed is that, and again, I'm going to use that dirty word Hollywood. I'm not going to include the recording industry in this, but for a fact, the studios don't want net neutrality at all. And it's not just about copyright filtering, because they want to be prioritized. They can pay for it. Okay, so they want priority. They want to be faster than, you know, some little movie website, independent film website.
Well, I don't even think that's
I
a
think
dirty
that's a dirty little
I don't
secret.
think that's a dirty little secret. Glickman has said that publicly.
Has
I
he?
actually-
Has he
I-
said that?
Google-
That he wants priority on the internet?
Google is using edge caching to get priority already.
Edge caching is not the network provider picking winners and losers.
But they're rich enough to do it, and no one else is. So that's
not
you know,
true.
I
that's
think the whole landscape is
tiered
shifting.
service
I
right
don't
there.
think the studios are monolithic on this issue anymore. And I really do think that there is a shift. And I think the creative community can come together with the so-called progressive community, whatever you want to call it. And I do think that, that you could have net neutrality policy legislation, whatever you want to call it, that addresses copyright infringement, because, of course, that is so important to AFM.
I'll say two things. The first is I'll never forget Terry Fisher, who's an old friend of ours who teaches at Harvard Law School in 2000. Dave Hurley, he may have actually been with me when he said this, but he said that within 10 years, every copyright panel will become a telecom panel, which this obviously is becoming. But I would just make the observation, I'll defer to Michael Bracey and Brian Calhoun on this point, but I think every point that everyone has made about this is valid, but I think where the devil in the details is that, I don't think it's going to pass, because clearly the House and the Senate have
It's
completely
not
different
in.
opinions
It's
about
not
this.
in.
It's not going
It's
to
It's not
pass.
going to
It's
pass,
a moot
but
issue.
let's say hypothetically it passed. I mean, it would come down to how you promulgate the regulations. And there isn't a country, there isn't a Western country that isn't going through the same thing, because how do you define reasonable network management? I mean, it's almost impossible to define, but I think you actually had something you wanted to.
There's two issues that are sort of intermingled here, and one is the net neutrality debate, and the other is copyright filtering. And regardless of this particular legislation, there are repeated calls from Hollywood and the recording industry for compulsory filtering in various contexts. And I just want to, based on I'd like to tell you guys a little bit about the experience that we have with our copyright identification system, and certainly caution against a government-mandated filtering, and caution against any speedy implementation of something like this. And here's why. What we have learned through our experience of implementing content identification system is that it's extremely complex and it's extremely nuanced in a way that most of the folks that are calling for it, the devil is in the details. It's all about how it's implemented. And if it's not implemented carefully, let me just tell you some of the issues that we have to face. So as I was telling you guys before, we let, not only record labels, but any audiovisual rights holders as well, deliver to us the reference files. When the users upload, we compare their upload against our reference, and then we allow the content owners to express a preference. A lot of the calls for filtering are always block, 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 assuming that every copyright holder wants everything down. What we do is a more subtle, we offer a more subtle set of choices to the copyright owners that participate in our system, saying when we detect a match, you can block it if you want, that's fine, it's up to you. You can also tell us you want us to license it on your behalf, and we'll sell advertising around it and share the advertising with you. Or if you want, we'll just give you some interesting marketing data about, where, not personally identifiable information, but who's, where are people watching this, and what are the graphs of, it's really helpful to know, where to plan your concert tours if you can see that something is popular, or whether your promotional campaign, your radio campaign in a certain city is working very well because you can see a spike in YouTube traffic. So we give all kinds of, where are people coming to that video from? Those are some of the choices that we give. So one thing is that, and many of the people using our system are opting for the latter two choices and not block. So one thing is that there's a lot of different preferences the copyright holders have. Another thing is fair use. A lot of, there is a substantial amount of fair use on YouTube. There's a lot of transformative works. There's a lot of commentary about different things. And the filtering system is a really powerful and at times can be scary tool. What we do for content owners that their usage policy is block, we block the file. And what do we do if it's a fair use? We give our users the ability to say, we are very transparent. We say your video has matched with an audio file delivered to us from Universal Music or whatever. If you think there's been a mistake, let us know, and you can file a dispute. And we give them some choices in the dispute. Do you have a license to use this? And guess what? A lot of people are putting up some sort of audio-visual content where they have a license to incorporate a little snippet of some song, and by and large, that got, no surprise, that got caught in the filtering. There's embedded third-party content right, and Universal Music doesn't own, the person that uploaded it certainly had the right to do, maybe it's a TV show that has a little snippet and they wanted it up. So, do you have a license to the content? Or is it a fair use of the content? Are you commenting on the song? And of course, there's a lot of there's some differing views on what is a fair use of a song, so that creates some issues. But is it a fair use? Or do you think there's actually just been a mistake and what we said is a match isn't a match? And that doesn't happen very often, but it can happen with technology, and we need a way to deal with all of these. We need a way to deal with all of these issues. Finally, territory. When there's a match, we're a global service. People should only be able to block or exploit in the territory in which they control the rights. But a lot of times, when we're talking about these ISP filterings, no one's dealing with all of these subtle issues and how are we going to handle all these issues. And my fear is that if we just say, okay, ISPs can block, what about all the music that's licensed that I just told you about, these elaborate arrangements that we have to license?
But how do you mean?
Are they going to be blocked from, they can never get to YouTube in the first place?
But I think these are exactly the kinds of marketplace policies and solutions that Gigi's approach would completely prohibit, because you're basically saying that the government would step in and say, no, you're not allowed to engage in any kinds of solutions
There is
like
a
that.
difference. There's a difference between edge technology like hers and network. Okay, and there's another point I forgot to make. Copyright filtering, even filtering for child porn, is not network management. It's content management. So it doesn't. Whatever Kevin Martin said in dicta in the Comcast case, which is probably, who knows, we're going to win in court anyway. It's not, he's wrong, okay? Copyright filtering is not managing a network, all right? Throttling back P2P is like Comcast did, is network management, but as he said, it wasn't reasonable network management. And I would point people to Ed Felton, professor from Princeton, did a fantastic presentation, which I'm sure is up on his website now, about how the FCC focused on the reasonableness and not on the network management.
Right.
I think we have to distinguish what is network management. Zahavah's YouTube is not a network. It doesn't manage a network.
But you've got to take it up to the 30,000-foot level that Rick was at, which is that, whether it's network or edge servers, whatever it is, the point is that you're allowing practices and marketplace solutions to address what has been the complete looting of copyright industries.
Yeah, but see, here's...
And in the name of there being a possible fair use or
there's-
things like that, and saying that filtering is off the
But this-
table as a
but
result,
here's the
it's
thing,
just
I
not
feel
a fair
bad
way to
'cause
address the problem.
David's being left out of this conversation, but there's a couple of ground rules that have to be established here. One is that the internet, to a certain degree, is a public accommodation because the taxpayers paid for it. And, a lot of the, and here's the dilemma, okay? The importance of net neutrality is that if you allow private companies to determine what goes to the network, you've opened up Pandora's box. Because we have verified, and again, Steve, I respectfully disagree with you. We do know what net neutrality is. It is defined, and it's a PR campaign to say that it's not defined. We all know what it is. But we have verifiable, specified instances of when telecommunications companies have blocked people for political speech. And it's happened several times. It happened with our friends Pearl Jam. It's happened with unions in Canada. It's happened several times.
happens on
And Comcast has done it.
Well, it's happening on
several
Google
times.
right now in China, and we
Right.
don't have
So
net
So when
neutrality.
you, when you
what
want
is
to
that
talk about, when you want to talk about blocking stuff, you open up Pandora's box.
It's
But let me
already
finish my
We were
point, though.
talking about the distinction between lawful and unlawful.
I
There
understand
you're
that.
talking about free
but-
speech that's
but-
lawful, it's
but-
not an
but
issue.
But that, I respectfully disagree with you. But here's the other problem, okay? And this is the 600-pound gorilla of the whole thing, which is, I don't know how many people are following this whole thing with the rollout of HD TV and mini cameras. And, the network is going to be clogged. And if we don't have broadband stimulus, the network could potentially break down because there's going to be so much HD TV video on the network, it's going to clog everything. So the telecoms do need to have a definition of what reasonable network maintenance is. The fundamental conflict here is what, in good intentions, the telecoms want to do with reasonable network management. But on the other hand, irrespective of your issues, which I respect, the problem is, do you give someone so much control that they no longer have permission to manage the traffic so the internet works and you get your email, but they potentially can block what they don't like, or potentially can block the person who's not paying them as opposed to the other person who's paying them. I think that's the issue.
Yeah, it's really about who decides, who's
Yeah.
part of the process, and in this issue, when it comes to our public's ability to speak on the internet and to have access to the internet, it's very important that consumers have a place at the table, because how this gets architected is extremely complex.
Right.
Can I go back
powerful.
just for a second and ask Sav a question here? You were talking about your content management system, right, on YouTube. You charge for that, right?
No,
You don't, it's completely free?
completely free to
Okay,
content.
okay. And also, when you get to a system where you're trying to have the difficulty of sorting out all these rights and everything, when the difficulty is on your side, you cry foul. But when the difficulty is on our side, it's like, well, we're going to just take all this data and dump it on you. You sort it out under a blanket license of some sort, and then you pay the payments out. You're fine with that. I think a lot of this is just business problems of who has to pay for what.
Yeah.
Because if we do a blanket license, which would solve your problems,
Right.
it's going to take about 18 to 20, 22, 23% of my earnings away. Now, if we do it, because it costs that much to manage a blanket license, because you got to find out who owns it, just like you were saying, then you got to be able to distribute to, and it costs a whole bunch of money. So that's one thing that we need to have come to some accord about who shares the cost of that. Okay,
Right.
it's just a business thing, and I think we'll get to that at some point.
We've
But-
been asking, just so you know, we've been asking every representative of the music publishers in the world. So we've been asking
HFA.
ASCAP, HFA, BMI, all the collecting societies internationally, please give us the data so that we can pay your member music publishers, please,
Yeah, but see,
please.
that's-
No,
yeah.
no, no,
Have you
no.
guys-
But they
That's,
can't,
we
though.
owe, that's
But
how
see,
we
but
add
they can't-
value.
But they can't, though. They can't give you the value.
That's right, because you have the hen
No,
guarding
no,
the
because
fox
it's against the
guard-
law.
what-
They can't give it to you because it's owned by the members.
It's not, data of who owns what. It's public.
It's owned by the members. See, this is the fundamental
It's not owned.
excuse me, it's owned by the members. This is the fundamental disconnect that we have here, is that
Okay.
the music people don't understand technology, the technology people don't understand music.
You're telling me because they own the data
Yes.
and they want to keep it private.
No, because
then-
the,
but
no,
they
it's a
want- expect me
non-profit.
to know who they are to pay for them?
You've never been in a band.
But see, you
The problem is
expect
this,
us,
the problem is,
so you
the
expect us to be able
PROs,
to know
the
who they are,
PRO
we don't
data
either.
is owned by
So
the
we-
members.
we
But
just
what
have
I'm
to
saying
work
is
that
the
out.
data, sometimes the data does exist, and your representatives who are supposedly acting in your interest are actually not acting in your interest, because what's in your interest is for them to give us the
No, they
data
can't
so
give the
that we can
data.
pay you.
They can't give you the data. That's a breach
You
of
need to
law.
have a PRO person here
It's
next
against
year.
the law for them to do that.
I had one more question. I have one more question.
No.
I think all
against the law.
Zahava's saying is that if there were a central repository or some central place that could help administer, even if it's just clearing individual licenses, it doesn't necessarily have to be on a statutory
We need open source
compulsory
metadata.
basis.
We need open source metadata is what we need.
Then you would,
Right.
you would solve the problem.
That's
Because
what-
she could, I mean, either
Right.
if it was a blanket basis, that'd be one way to do it, or it could be on a clearinghouse kind of basis where,
Absolutely.
there's an offer made by YouTube to pay X, and that individual publisher can say yes or no to it.
The only
and-
way we
and-
get through this is to have open source metadata. That's the only
Yeah.
solution. But all of us should be
But
working
this-
together for that. But he
this
can't
is one
give
of-
you the
This is one of the
information.
things in the
Who owns
150.
the data?
See, okay, I don't
do you
want,
think owns
I
the
know this may
data?
be boring for everyone but a songwriter, but the problem is, they're organized as nonprofit institutions, and the assets of the nonprofits are owned by the members, the songwriters, and the list of all the data they absorb is owned by the writers. For example, I'll tell you,
Is
the
owned by the
fear that goes back 40 years. I mean, anybody here a Johnny Mercer fan, by any chance? Here we go. I mean, the problem that ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, we should never leave out our good friends at CSAC out of this discussion, but the reason they want to release the data is because it's so valuable to advertising companies. So over the years, basically, they try to house the data because it's owned by the members. So if they start giving out the data, the members have to monetize it.
But I don't, this is kind of a side, I think
Yeah.
it's gone off the track a little bit. I think what Zahavah's talking about, and this is really
That's 'cause
what
you're in the
was
record
one of the things, one of the things, right, on the mechanical where we had the 115 legislation that we were discussing several years ago, which may or may not come to life again, is having some kind of agent on behalf of the publishers and songwriters that can help the process along.
Right.
Now, they may have a disagreement over whether, you expand the compulsory license to, beyond what exists now to cover video. But, even if you didn't expand it in that way, just having somebody helping to, one place for somebody to go is enormously helpful.
That's what we're trying to do.
Well, we actually, under the uni license proposal back in, 2006 or something, I don't know, came to an accord with a way that we could do it, and you were in the meeting where we all got together and talked with the tech guys. We had the big roundtable discussion, and you wouldn't pay us enough for it to be useful we couldn't do it at the rate that you're willing to pay for it.
Right.
Now, maybe you're making more money now and you can pay for it.
I was working for a different company, by the way.
Oh, she's working for a different company. She's completely changed her opinion.
No, I just don't want that to be attributed to.
What do you want to say?
But I mean, but I guess I want to mention it because the difficulty is, Yahoo Music and all that, they weren't making enough money to be able to pay for the service that they needed, and we couldn't provide it to them for what they could pay. So that was just one of those things. It was a business marketplace thing, and we couldn't fix it.
So it's not fixed, and now nobody's making any money.
It's still a mess. I had one last question for you. Snowcap has got like 8 million fingerprinted files, right? That's the last thing I heard from somebody you ought to know. You can't use the Snowcap system? I mean, why go to the trouble of doing your own system? Just license it
So
from them.
the issue that we have, actually, the record labels are really generally good at giving us their data of what they own, what they're.
Say that again. The record labels are good. That's it. Because you're never going to hear that again.
I knew that
Not from me
$20 was
forever.
going to pay off.
No,
I mean, it took you long enough.
no.
percentage goes to Rick?
Let's put this in perspective. Relative to the music publishers, they are better. They are better
Give the $20 back.
at data management. So they're better at delivering us when we do a license with them, they send us here's a feed of all of our, sound recordings that you can fingerprint, or maybe they'll just send the fingerprints, and here's the name of the track and the artist and the album. What the data that's missing is the music publishing that's incorporated.
Yeah, well, the
in that.
music publishers don't make nearly as much money, so it's harder for them to put those systems in place. I
Okay,
mean,
so let's put it on
Yeah,
the, let's put it
I
on
thought
Let's
this,
not go there, right?
I thought this might be a good time for a non-controversial issue. And I wanted to mention an issue that's important to AFM that I think is important to all the performers that are here today. For years, performers have had trouble carrying their instruments to gigs on airplanes. And we've been working on that issue for many years. We tried to work things out with the airlines and got nowhere. Every airline has its own arbitrary and very capricious policy in terms of both carry-on and checked luggage affecting musical instruments. So what we were able to do last year, thanks to Chairman Inouye when he was chairman of the Commerce Committee.
Why don't you tell us more about that particular congressman? Like, what state?
Senator Inouye from Hawaii?
Yep.
Yeah, we hated to see him move from commerce to appropriations because he was a good friend to us and put language in the FAA reauthorization bill last year, which would have established a uniform policy for all airlines in terms of both size and weight of musical instruments.
So what's the status of that now, Hal?
Well, I've been working the Hill again, and I've been assured that in the Senate version of the FAA bill, our language will be in there again, and I'm talking to the House policymakers on that too.
Who are you talking to in the House?
Well, I'm just beginning to talk to.
Just give me your schedule.
No, I can think of.
I'm meeting tomorrow with Congressman Costello's staff person. He's the chairman of the Aviation Subcommittee in the House.
Right. Anybody
I'm
from
meeting
Massachusetts?
Friday with
Anybody from Massachusetts on that committee I can help with?
Oh, let me think. Well, John Hall, who is an AFM member, is on the Aviation
Right.
Subcommittee. We expect him to help on that. Steve Cohen from Memphis is very sympathetic to
Good.
performers.
He's a good man.
Yeah. So I think that the problem was the FAA bill didn't pass, but if it had passed, we were golden. And the question is, again, not whether we'll get our language in the bill, but whether the FAA bill will pass this year.
The
But
two
we're
people in the
hopeful.
House I really like is Steve Lynch, who's my congressman from Boston, who's a huge music guy. Actually been arrested at concerts, but that's a whole different story. But also, I can never remember the gentleman's name who's relatively newcomer. He's actually reached out to a few times. He's the congressman from Pittsburgh.
Mike Doyle.
Yeah.
Mike Doyle.
Yeah.
And those guys are super supportive of musicians.
Oh, yeah. There are a lot of friends of performers in Congress, thank goodness, because music is basically nonpartisan. So we are able usually to get nonpartisan support for our issues.
You know, Orrin Hatch and Senator Corrin from Texas are huge supporters of musicians. As a matter of fact, I saw Corrin at South by Southwest one year. So, I mean, he was, seeing a Texas band. He wasn't seeing the Beastie Boys, but nonetheless, he still was there.
Anyway.
I want to open it up to the audience at some point, but there's two things that I'd like to really, since it's just such an all-star panel, there's two issues that I find interesting. I'd like to have everybody sort of get their take on it, and then we can open it up to everybody. But the two things I'm interested in, first of all, because it's not inertia, it's because everyone's so busy with other issues that I think that over the next few years, the major developments in copyright law are going to be done through litigation. I mean, I think we're going to see more litigation than legislation, and I think that if you look at where we are in the court system right now, there's so many fundamental cases. YouTube obviously is involved in several of these. But there's so many, potentially huge cases in the system that, is litigation going to be what we're following the next 2 years? And the second part of that question is that, what other things we can do proactively as citizens to ask the Congress to implement certain policies that will open up licensing and prevent litigation, if that makes sense. What does everybody take a shot at that?
Well, I hope that litigation isn't the answer, because if Congress is slow, the courts are usually even slower. So, and for performers, litigation is very costly. So for us, this is not the way to go.
Right.
I mean, but there are critical cases, right?
Yeah.
There's the Viacom YouTube case, there's the court's consideration of the Google book search settlement. There's a bunch of there's the Cablevision case. That's a huge case. If people don't know what that case is about, that's about, Cablevision has what's called a network DVR service. So basically, it's a TiVo service, except the copy resides on Cablevision's server. And Judge Denny Chin in the district court said that Cablevision was a direct infringer because those copies, the server copies, resided on its servers. And I don't remember what he said about buffer copies, but the Second Circuit reversed
Right.
and said that Cablevision was not directly infringed. The studios and broadcasters that had sued Cablevision have asked the Supreme Court to hear the case. The Supreme Court has asked the Solicitor General for her opinion, and I can tell you that we've been one of the groups madly going around to every agency with copyright jurisdiction or telecommunications jurisdiction, asking them to tell the SG not to take the case. I'm sure Steve's been on the exact
But is there a
opposite
doubt
side.
what
It's a huge case. It's so huge.
Is there a doubt what the outcome's going to be, though?
Sure, I have
Really?
no idea. I mean, it's more, this Supreme Court's much more predictable on patents. They haven't taken many.
Right.
I mean, they took the Eldred case, but that's a different,
Yeah,
that's
but
a
I mean,
horse
are
of a
they,
different
are they
color.
taking this case because?
We don't know
No,
that
we
they're
don't
taking the
know.
case.
There's just been a petition
But I
for
mean,
them to.
but is okay. Here's what I think. I think it's going to get affirmed. But I mean, the bottom line is, are they taking the case because they just want to clarify the Sony versus Universal standard? Is that really maybe
No,
why they
no,
want to do it?
because contributory
David,
is not even
David's
in
the
the
expert.
case.
David, you tell me.
This has nothing to do with Sony versus Universal,
Yeah. No?
although
Thank God.
superficially it does, because to many people, they just look at the result in the case. And the result in the case is, instead of making your copy for later viewing on a device in your home, you're doing it at the cable companies and on their machinery. So when you look at what's actually happening in terms of the end result, I think what drove the court to its result and what make a lot of people think no big deal is, come on, just another way of doing the same thing that we're all doing anyway and we all
Right.
know we can do. The court's analysis is just wacky,
Right.
absolutely wacky. It does real violence to fundamental doctrines of copyright law, down to reading sentences out of the definition of public performance.
Right.
So while you may not be uncomfortable with the result, there are real problems with the reasoning of the court, and if you extend that reasoning to other factual situations, you could find some real problems.
But-
So
but-
it's
Well,
an
no
important
less
case in that
wacky,
respect.
though, David, you might admit that it was no less wacky than Judge Chin's.
Right.
The rationale was pretty whacked out,
Right.
too. I mean,
Well-
he was a judge who thought he was an engineer.
Right.
His,
They were
his-
rating-
no, his opinion read more like an engineering manual than
Right.
a legal opinion, I agree. But all I'm telling you, all I'm saying is, again,
The ramifications of the
it's-
opinion
it's-
go beyond the
Well, but-
results.
but
That's what I don't
afterwards.
see.
But my
I guess I
point-
don't see where, I think the larger point is the disconnect between digital copyright and copyright law. I mean, the fact that we're arguing over whether buffer copies should be a licensable event or not, to me, that seems wacky.
that's the least of the issues in cable
Yeah.
vision.
Yeah,
It's the least of the
Agreed, but
issues.
it's still, I mean, again, when you're in an environment where, every time you bring up a document from your random access memory, you're making a copy. Everything you do digitally demands copies, and you're dealing with the questions of, should you have to pay 2 licenses because it's a public performance and a download? I mean, when you have those kind of questions popping up, you start to realize that the law really doesn't make sense
Yeah, but-
anymore.
but you
And
know-
while, Walter, I might agree with you
Right.
that things might get settled in the courts, and it is unfortunate in some ways, I do think there's a deep need for copyright reform that looks at the way people use technologies and the
Right.
way technologies work, and try to get the law and the technology to coexist. We're operating with a pre-VCR law.
Yeah, but you
I
have.
mean, it makes no sense.
But the thing is, we have good decisions and bad decisions. We have good judges and bad judges. And we have some decisions that are written very well and some decisions that are written very poorly. Copyright law is not immune from this. We have bad admiralty decisions. And unfortunately, because we all like copyright law so much, it disappoints us when there's a bad decision. We want clarity in the law. Sony versus Universal is a very poorly written decision. I said it, okay? I mean, I've taught copyright law for a long time, and my students always say, what is the story with this case? We all know the history. It's not well written. But unfortunately, we do have a lot of good judges. I happen to like Roberts. I like the way he writes. I think he's a very clear-minded guy. But we don't always
As
get
long
the
as he's
decisions.
not memorizing anything.
Right.
Sorry.
But, we don't always get the decisions we want, and unfortunately, you have some, you have a Jane Ginsburg, who's a wonderful person who really cares about copyright law, but on the other hand, you might have a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals judge who doesn't care about copyright law, and consequently, he or she cares about criminal law, so this isn't important to them. But I still fundamentally believe, and David's the expert, not I, but I still think that I have hope. And that I think that when the Supreme Court wants to take a case like that, they're interested in taking a case like that, I think that clarity is a big part of it. Because Rehnquist, you know, is Robert's mentor.
You
And
think
Rehnquist
Rockford gave us clarity on the Sony standard?
No, I understand that, but I think that they've always regretted that that happened. And I think there's a certain, irrespective of political affiliation, I think there's a certain tendency in the Supreme Court for folks to try to get decisions right. I don't know antitrust law. I don't understand admiralty. I know a little bit about copyright law, but I do think they try to get it right. You may not agree with the decision in Eldred, I do, but I thought it was a well-written decision. But, you know, I still hold out faith that they try to take cases to try to provide us with clarity. That being said, does anybody have well, actually, you know what? I want to allow everyone to say whatever they want to say. Anybody have any final
This
thoughts?
woman back here is dying to ask a question.
Let's open it up.
Yeah.
Well, I actually have two people that I want to identify.
I think we've spent the last hour and a quarter saying whatever we want.
Well, is Monica Herzig here? Hey, Monica. Monica's a distinguished academic from the University of Indiana, and she has a question she wanted to pose to us. It's a good question. Sure. Actually, we have Casey has the microphone.
I teach in the arts administration program at Indiana University, and I'm also a jazz musician. And we were just alerted that, yeah, they still survive. And we were just alerted that in the economic stimulus bill, there's the language in there that says none of the money could be used for, it says, I believe, casinos, museums, theaters, all in that regard, and it was accepted with a large majority. But this would mean that all the nonprofit sector, the creative sector with nonprofit organizations could not benefit from it, and obviously they're suffering very much in terms of symphonies going down and museums going down. So I was just curious if you know anything about it, what the news is.
The 50 million that I was talking about before, that would benefit the nonprofit arts organizations. What happened is, in the language that you mentioned, where it's specific on museums, theaters, et cetera, it doesn't mention, interestingly enough, symphonies. But that's Senator Coburn's language that stripped the 50 million from the Senate bill. But since it's in the House bill, we hope that part of the House bill will prevail.
Good.
So,
Tom, do you have a question? Tom.
There's a woman back there who's like
Oh, I'm sorry. No,
standing
Tom,
for the last half an hour.
but we had people who had actually lined up earlier for questions. You want to ask your question?
I came here to see Zahavah. I'm glad to see you defending your user base. Now, I want to, without talking about legal terms, the single most important thing for working musicians is YouTube. They don't need MySpace. I went to see Eric Schmidt and Mark Warner at Blacksburg, and I waited for him to talk about something else besides greening of environment. So, as the users, we're not sure that Google is defending us if we're going to do cover songs. Now, this is the first time I've heard that the national music publishers are going to issue takedowns. I had a Billy Joel song taken down a couple weeks ago, and I put it back up there. So when it's my choice to take an ad or whatever, that's my choice to sing the song, and I don't want YouTube sending machine messages to me to take down my songs without now you say that there's a dispute resolution of that. But I've been in Hollywood for 35 years.
When you say it's your choice, so first of all, thank you for using
Fair use,
YouTube.
it's just fair use. Now,
We love that you're using YouTube.
I love you.
Are you single?
Why don't you guys get married or something?
You said about YouTube. If you're not going to defend fair use, your business is fair use.
So let me just ask you.
Fair use for you to do a cover song of a Billy Joel song. That's
I'd like to add, as a musician, is it your view that to be able to record a song of someone else on video your tape?
If I want to, it's nobody's opinion of what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the song. It's a cover song. There's a compulsory.
So there's not a compulsory for
video.
audio
Not for
visual
video,
works,
that's a sync right.
only
Yeah.
for audio.
You're calling this a film sync license. I was in Hollywood for 35 years. I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to, this is what you call the camel's nose under the tent. They want to get rid of the compulsory. They don't like the compulsory anymore.
No?
The audio,
Call this a film sync?
yeah,
It
so
is a film
115
sync.
That's what it
expressly
is.
That's what
excludes
it is.
audiovisual works. So under current law, The only argument would be whether it's a fair use. And so, and I agree that maybe we should consider that. And one of the questions that you asked is what can users do to, you know, it does strike a lot of people as really surprising when they hear that they're not allowed.
But that's been the law since 1909.
No, consumers don't know that. and I
It's
don't
not
think
like we
Congress
invented
does
that, and we're not camels trying to put our nose under the tent. It's been around forever. That's the law. It's always been the law.
I know exactly when it happened. I know what I'm talking
Right, but we didn't used to have the technology.
You call it the internet as a film set license, that's what you're saying. So there's a new technology, and you're saying this is a film. I'm using a videotape at home for nonprofit.
Oh, if you're,
Singing a
so
song.
I think what you're saying is
YouTube
if it's
is
a
not
video of you
nonprofit.
singing the song.
Video me, now, we're
Okay.
a bit confused.
But we're not-
No, I understand what you're saying.
To allow people to use songs under their birthday party songs and stuff like that, that's different. We're talking about fair use of people singing somebody else's song.
So the music publisher that issued us a DMCA takedown. So first of all, a cover video would not be caught in our automated technology because we don't have a reference file of you singing that song. But a music publisher looked up the song that you sang and filed a DMCA notice saying that they believe that's a copyright infringement. So some of the music publishers are doing that.
You guys are proving my point about copyright law. I mean, is it asinine that if you post a YouTube video of you singing a song badly, that you should be subject to some sort of license?
Are you
I
saying
think
that
it's
Tom?
asinine.
Are you saying that Tom has a bad singing voice? All I know is that somebody said birthday party song. And I'm like, wow.
It's
Nick
a
Cave.
real issue.
I've got to tell you.
What,
I got to tell you.
I think Nancy has.
Complain to the music publisher.
Not one dime is lost if Tom sings Betty Davis Eyes. Not one dime is lost to Kim
That's
Carnes.
not true at all.
Nancy has a
That's
question.
not true at all.
I think Nancy has a question. So we would,
Hi, I'm sorry. First of all, that's not true. When someone does a bad cover version of a song, it can have a detrimental impact on the long-term value of the song. That's not fair to the songwriters. That's not fair to the original performers either. But my question is actually for YouTube. How is there no porn and never been any porn on YouTube?
Well,
So porn is,
Sorry.
yeah, would you like the special password?
Sorry.
That was a joke. So,
Are you guys still talking about Tom singing?
no.
we're going directly to the porn conversation.
So the way that porn gets handled on YouTube is through a reactive flagging system. Nothing gets, we have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of videos uploaded every day. Something like 19 hours of video is uploaded every minute to YouTube. We don't do any pre-screening of anything other than our content identification, the automated system. Things go up. If someone uploads porn to YouTube, we have a flagging system. It's our community of users around the world, actually.
Oh, is that how it works?
That they
Wow,
flag.
I never knew that.
It's inappropriate. We have a little drop-down menu on each, what we call the watch page, where the video plays back, that says, report this video as a violation of terms of use, and there's different, you know, it could be porn or violence or.
Is it the church lady? I mean, you actually have people who are actually looking at this to
We
say that
seem
there's
to
no.
have some people that are interested in policing certain issues, yeah, but actually it's thousands of people, I mean, it's millions of people around the world. There's millions, so it's like a constant police force that works on our behalf, and it typically comes down within like just super, super quick.
I have a YouTube complaint that I'd like to work in right now if I could. I'm a big wrestling fan,
Why did
believe
you
it or not.
agree to do this, Zahavah?
I want to know why. Has anybody seen the video of the wrestler that gets in the fist fight with somebody in the parking lot in Vancouver? Am I the only person that's seen this? See, nobody watches wrestling anymore. Nobody watches wrestling anymore. But the clip is only 12 seconds long. I want to see the actual entire fight in the parking lot. All right.
Did I answer your question, though? Does that adequately answer your question?
All right.
I
so
mean, I just-
who else
so
has
it's
a
all-
question?
Hold on, because I
this
think, hold on for 1 second.
So
'cause
it's all reactive? You don't have a filtering for it?
No, it's all reactive. We don't have a filter in for it. And unlike, if what you're sort of suggesting is that we can filter, filter for porn, why can't we filter for copyright? Right? The answer is A, it's reactive, and it's because porn is clearly visible on its face. Someone can look at a video and know that it's pornography. If you look at a song, you don't know as another user whether or not A, it was uploaded by someone who had authorization, like the owner, or B, whether we have obtained a license. So you can't, we've obtained a license from, until Warner just with until things just fell apart with Warner, we had for all the major record labels and hundreds of indie record labels. So you don't know, a user can't look at a song and just because they know it's a commercial recording that it's not authorized to be on YouTube.
I think this.
Thank you.
I think.
Thank you. I'll try to make this very fast. This is a panel on copyright, and not enough. Copyright is about permission and protection. I want to make that point, emphasize that to you. And I don't think enough was said about this aspect in regards to the new technology that is now eroding the copyrighted. For example, free music downloads. What's the point of having them copyright? Or YouTube. Now, you all, this is something you all say you have a big pot, a big wallet, and you're willing to pay and you want to pay. But where's the permission?
No,
Where's the permission from the other people?
Let me ask you.
And then if you do have a big pot of, big wallet, why don't you all start putting it into a pot of gold? And then when people are going to see this big pot of gold, there's going to be a lot of legislation coming towards you in this regard.
So there's money and gold in the pot.
We actually don't.
Okay,
Well,
I just want to make sure.
the whole aspect, we want to pay, we want to pay.
No, this is very
Okay,
important. This
start putting it into escrow,
This is
be proactive in this regard.
It's a very important point, and thanks for raising it.
No, it's good.
We actually don't commercially exploit any videos on YouTube unless and until we've identified all the rights holders and have obtained direct licenses with those right holders through our deals. So if something that we don't know what it is, we don't sell advertising around it. So there is no money on that. And that's my point. If we could have a blanket license, then we could create a big old pot of gold and everyone could come collect it. But we don't wish to commercially exploit that stuff without authorization.
We're evolving towards that point. That's my fundamental belief. David may disagree with me, but I think that's where we're evolving. But it takes 10 years to get to that point, and I think that what's lacking, and I'm going to pontificate right now, if I may, but I think what's lacking is that it has to be a discussion that involves all different kinds of people, and in order to have the balance between all the stakeholders, be it the RIAA or the indies or the songwriters or the managers or the Future Music Coalition or the unions or the consumers. I mean, we're talking about a long, drawn-out process where everybody has an opportunity to talk about this. So I think that's why it's going to take 10 years, but I think we're evolving towards that point. We're evolving towards some way of trying to do blanket licensing and trying to find out some way of, fairly dispensing the money. And may I say, I mean, Steve and I may disagree on a lot of things, but he and I may come from different parts of the spectrum, but we've both worked very hard at Sound Exchange to try to implement systems that incorporate some of these elements and try to pay people fairly. And, to a certain degree, maybe I'm patting myself in the back here, but I think we're doing a lot of the Lord's work in terms of trying to figure out these systems. So in the event that in the future, we have the ability to figure out other ways of licensing, hopefully we're creating some sort of
mechanism.
Well, no, yeah, I mean, but, something along with the ASCAP, the BMI, and the CSAC people to try to figure out ways of, fairly accounting for money, collecting money, what's an administration fee, how do you find people, which, we get criticized for, but we, try to be proactive trying to find people. So, it's all these little pieces that hopefully get to the point you want to get to in terms of blanket licensing and giving people money. David. David, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, my name is David Hurley. I'm a professor at Northeastern.
And you were in a famous band.
I was in a, thanks, Walter.
Tell everybody what
I was in a
band
band called O Positive. We had a major label deal in Epic. Had a great time. I'm a lawyer. I was actually a lawyer before, but I quit. But I came to my senses after my band broke up. Anyway, I just want to echo a lot of the points that I've been hearing. I think, I was taking some notes. I think that, copyright is supposed to promote the progress of science and the useful arts. And it used to be predicated upon control because it used to be easy to control, and that made sense, and that was a sensible default for copyright because there were physical objects involved and you could control the flow of those things. Now control is not really as feasible anymore, and so I think that there needs to be some way of reassessing copyright law, and I I hope there can be some kind of a, as Walter said, it takes 10 years. We began the 1976 Copyright Act, in the 1950s.
Yeah.
Began having hearings 2 decades before. Right. So I would hope there was going to be some, I was a little discouraged to hear you say, David, that you thought there wasn't going to be any legislation in the near term or any change to the copyright law. But I think, there's got to be some way, sort of away from control and maybe more towards compensation and monitoring and in a way that won't violate privacy. But it just seems to me that, the complexity of licensing, and as Rick pointed out, the 20th century's worth of all these different methodologies led to all these different organizations, be they ASCAP or Harry Fox or sync licenses. A lot of these distinctions are being blurred by digital technology, and I think that the whole slate needs to be kind of scrubbed clean again and done something really comprehensive and simple, because copyright law is, the benefits of internet and digital technology are so phenomenal, and it's so hamstrung from the get-go by the old law, and it's important to compensate copyright holders and artists, but I think a permission-based structure just isn't going to serve the fundamental purpose of copyright law.
I told the panelists there'd be no metaphysical questions.
Well,
Okay.
actually, Pam Samuelson at Berkeley actually has a project. It's not just with, what people consider the copy left. It's also with some of the content companies trying to look at that very same thing. Public Knowledge has something called 6 Steps to Digital Copyright Sanity. Crafting,
But she's not an advocate of copyright law, though.
crafting a
But seriously, do you
pre-VCR
really-
law for a YouTube world, but
But is that the person you want to cite, though? She's not exactly someone who supports copyright law.
Warner
but the
Music
point-
is doing it with the, what's the college initiative that they're doing? Warner Music, where they're letting people download.
Chorus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Chorus, that's
She-
an example of that.
This is sort of her, she's older and she wants to do something that will be her legacy. So this is a process that doesn't include just people who are sort of on her side of the academic aisle. It also includes the content companies.
Right.
So people are starting to think about it. It is going to take a long time. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I just want to give a hat tip to a guy named Mike Masnick, who writes for his blog called Tech Dirt. And he gave this fantastic speech at Medem in France about new business models, and Trent Reznor was his example.
It's on YouTube.
What's that?
It's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube, and it's on his blog. I watched it right before I came here. I just want to commend it to people because it's very, very thoughtful, and it really demonstrates how songwriters and musicians can thrive in an era where, let's face it, you cannot control this technology. Okay, even if one day Public Knowledge loses the copyright filtering battle, which we won't, what's going to happen is the pirates will encrypt everything. So all you do when you have these heavy-handed technology mandates is you screw people who want to get legitimate content. You never stop the pirates that way. So I'm not a musician. I did play a mean clarinet and was all-state band a couple times, but. And I don't presume to give advice to musicians, but particularly professional musicians. But watch this video. I think it just gives some really interesting ideas how you can make a good living in this kind of untethered environment. That we're in.
I would respectfully disagree with you because I think Pam Samuelson is anti-musician, but that's just based on her. She's anti-musician. She's anti-musician. No, she's anti-musician. Gigi. She has the way musicians should be compensated, but that's a whole different question. But if you want to talk about the clear-minded, thoughtful people who work on this issue, Jane Ginsburg at Columbia, Paul Goldstein at Stanford, Carla Hess at the University of Berkeley, who, in my opinion, is probably the greatest living copyright historian. If we're going to do hardcore metaphysics of copyright law, it's going to be done by those 3 people. And it's going to be done by people who fundamentally believe that creators should be compensated.
It's going to be done by people on both sides.
No, it's not.
Somebody made that point early on, and it's not going to be.
Are you going to tell me that
Pam Samuelson, Larry Lessig, Gigi Sohn axis, and it's not going to be the Jane Ginsburg,
I'm talking about people who are
Doug
competent,
Lichtenberg
though.
axis.
Are you telling me that you have better people than Goldstein, Ginsburg,
No, I'm saying
and
they should
Hess?
all get in a
No,
room
but are you saying
together
they're
and
better?
sing Kumbaya.
Are you saying they're better? Are you saying that I'm a better quarterback than Tom Brady? I mean, that's ridiculous.
Can I frame it a different way? Because I don't think
Yeah.
we're talking about copyright holders versus non-copyright
No, I'm
holders.
talking about people who are competent.
People what?
People who are competent.
So on YouTube, right, we have professional, commercially successful, people sometimes copy and upload third-party commercially successful
Right.
stuff. they also create their own, an enormous amount, an unprecedented amount of their own copyrighted original work, right? YouTube has done more to promote creativity and originality and a burst and explosion of sharing of creativity and bringing the public into that. They're both copyright holders, and we need to find a way to protect the interest of the third-party, commercial copyright owners that are seeking compensation, but also to promote the ability of regular users who are also creators and copyright holders in their work to be able to distribute and share their works with the world.
You can solve all these problems. The problem you can't solve is the moral rights issue, because we don't have moral rights, and the day comes when somebody who's the KKK uses a Stevie Wonder song, or somebody who's bigoted against Catholics or Jewish uses a Billy Joel or a Willie Nelson song to promote their cause. I mean, that's where the system breaks down, because some people don't want to have their music affiliated with people with negative or derogatory opinions. That's the one problem with the whole scenario.
Or political speech, which gets you, I think, flips you back, Walter. I mean, that's, the moral rights issue is a very difficult one.
Right.
But the problem that comes in is, what if you're making legitimate criticism of something, or what if you're using it for? I know some of the musicians were upset when Republicans use their works, or it rarely happens the other way around. But I mean, it's political process, it's political speech. I mean, where do you draw the line, and where does it start to kind of come up against something called the First Amendment?
Yeah, but
I'm sorry. I got to say something.
You really want to have
I've got to address the Trent Reznor issue, if you don't mind. I want to say this because I'm never going to get a word in edgewise if I don't. When people like Gigi and the guy on Tech Dirt start talking about how we've got to get a new business model where we make money off of free, which I've never been able to understand. But anyway, when they talk about that, they need to separate out artists like Trent Reznor, who got famous because record labels paid the money to make them famous. Then they went out and used the fame that the record labels made selling records to then sell concert tickets, T-shirts, branding themselves. Now, first of all, that's a fairly disingenuous argument. Had he made his money and become famous on free, I'd buy it, but he didn't, okay? He made his money because somebody else invested in him. Then he took that fame and went out and leveraged it. Okay, that's fine with him, but don't claim that that's the way you make money off of free. Also, songwriters are too ugly to go out and tour, okay? Songwriters cannot sing well, I can tell you personally. We cannot sell concert tickets. We make our money off of record sales and airplay, okay? So record sales taken out of the equation leaves us only airplay. And if people get all the music all the time for free, they don't even listen to the radio anymore, so we start losing airplay. Then they take away our right to get money off an audio-visual download, okay? So we lose that. They're just taking it and taking it and taking it. And I gotta tell you, right now, practically no professional songwriters left in this country. And if you want to know why 10 years ago you watched the Grammys to see an arresting performance, and the other night you watched to see a performer arrested, it's because the quality of the music is deteriorating, okay? That's all.
Okay, I'm going to give, I've had too much fun. But I want to give David Carson the last word, because he's David Carson. So David, why don't you just sum up everything for us?
Well, I don't know quite how to sum up such a disparate conversation on so many different fronts. I think probably we're not going to, let me actually sum up by picking up on a question you asked but wasn't really answered. I don't think we're going to see a lot of legislation happen in this Congress. We might see performance rights. I still think it's a long shot. I'll put in a plug for Orphan Works. We might see that, but I'm not so sure that's going to happen. I think that's probably about the extent of what we can imagine to see legislatively. I think litigation front may well be where the action is. If the Supreme Court takes the Cablevision case, that could be, they could do what they did in Grokster and just come up with some little tiny fix that really doesn't mean anything. Yeah. Or they could do something revolutionary, because there are some important rights at play that the Second Circuit decision has created a great deal of uncertainty about, and the Supreme Court might be able to clarify that. Another issue that you should watch for is the so-called making available issue. Thank you, Steve, for opening up that Pandora's box with your series of litigations. But there are many ways you can look at the issue, but looking at it from one perspective, we have a treaty obligation to have a, quote, making available right, whereby the copyright owner has the right to control whether or not you make his or her work available on the internet, among other things, for people to download or listen to at the time that they choose it. Now, you can read the Cablevision case and say we don't have that right at all because an on-demand performance is not a public performance, according to the Second Circuit. Interesting conclusion, but that's where they lead you. But beyond that, do we have a making available right, which means that the copyright owner, and only the copyright owner, has the right to make the work available for other people to download? A number of courts have said no in a number of cases that the RIAA has brought. Some courts have said, well, sort of in a way, a backwards way. They're all district courts, so at the moment, who knows where it's going to end up. But if it gets up to the Court of Appeals level and we get rulings saying there is no making available right, we got a big problem. A, it's a treaty problem, but B, I think we ought to ask ourselves, is that really where we want to be? I think some people at this table will say that's exactly where we want to be. I think anyone who cares about artists, authors, and their rights might be a little disturbed by that. And it's not going to happen in Congress, at least not unless the courts really, really make a big blunder and Congress has to step in and fix it. But the thing about Congress is Congress rarely steps in and fixes anything. You look at copyright legislation over the last several years, Congress hasn't made a single decision on anything, except, I guess, the Family Home Recording Act.
Well, no, the IP enforcement bill, which is a perfect example of what you just said.
They didn't decide
They
anything.
don't fix anything.
The Pro-IP Act was tinkering around the edges. There wasn't much in it, quite frankly. When copyright legislation happens, it happens because there's consensus, because anyone who matters on either side of the issue comes to the table, gets what they want, and you got a bargain that everyone can live with. That's not the way you really make law. That's not the way, when you have a real big problem, you really solve it. So I guess it's not a very hopeful note to end on, to say that legislation just doesn't seem to be the way to make progress, no matter what your definition of progress is. But that just seems to be the story lately, and I so far see no reason to change it.
That's your story, and you're sticking to it.
That's right.
All right, let's give everybody a nice round of applause. This is great.